Hello folks, and welcome back to the Homestead Skill of the Month Club. I'm Esther Emery, and I'm your Master of Ceremonies for 12 Skills in 12 Months. It's going very quickly. We are already to the end of the second month. Our first month was planning and preparedness. Our second month is old-fashioned cooking, and we're already to the last session in old-fashioned cooking. I'm not going to introduce very much new material, if any, today. We've covered a lot. There have been a lot of tutorials on how to do particular processes, and also some long videos with a lot of information about the science of baking, the art of cooking from scratch, a favorite cookbook, and some ideas for you to incorporate scratch cooking in your own life. I do want to present a challenge to you this week, as I always do, and I also want to do a lot of celebration. I feel very validated and satisfied by our little experiment in terms of gathering community around a skill. People have been incredibly generous with their knowledge. In our Facebook group, there have been so many recipes shared and tips shared and encouragement, even across real differences in terms of whether people are able to have gluten or willing to have animal products. Things that really can be divisive have just disappeared in kind of a spirit of mutual aid and assistance. And that's been a really touching thing for me. And so I want to just take a moment to really shout out the people who are generous with skills. You will save us. Well, clearly the celebration part is a little bit emotional for me, so let's skip to the challenge. I'll come back to the celebration in a minute. Your challenge is to make a tiny change that's going to carry some of the things we've talked about and learned this month into your future, into your life. Integrate it into your way of being in the world. And I have a few categories in which you might want to make that tiny change. Of course, these are all suggestions. But before I tell you the categories, first let's shout out to the concept of a tiny change. We did this at the end of the first month as well, and I believe that this is one of the most powerful ways to bring your life to where you want it to be. It's to make not big changes, but tiny ones. If you have an impulse to say, well, a tiny change doesn't matter, I don't want to make a tiny change, I think that's actually literally resistance to the most powerful and effective way to become truly who you want to be in your day-to-day life. If you think about a car going out of control on an icy road, an experience I hope very few of you have had, but I certainly have, you don't solve that problem by making a big move. You solve that problem by making a small, intentional, controlled move that gets your wheels under you again, gets you in control of your life, and puts you in charge of what your choices are from moment to moment. That's why I so much believe in tiny changes, and why our 4th week homework or challenge is for you to make your own tiny change towards either simple living, healthy eating, or food self-sufficiency, and how all those things are kind of tangled up together in our theme this month of old-fashioned cooking. I started out the month of old-fashioned cooking by explaining the term, what it means to me, old-fashioned cooking, and how it's a direct reference to my mother's book. My mother, who has passed away 10 years now, more than 10 years, wrote this book, which was originally the old-fashioned recipe book. This is one of the old copies, which was collated probably by my sister Dolly, who sometimes watches these videos. It was a labor of love by my mother and her whole family. And because of that, I inherited a kind of responsibility, a kind of legacy regarding awareness of where our food comes from and what a healthy relationship with the land, with where our food comes from could look like. As many of you know who have followed my story, that hasn't always been a happy or healthy thing. There have been times when that legacy was very heavy on me, and I wanted to live a different life, and I had even dissonance in my life over whether I could, in fact, be aware of the concerns that I have about big agriculture or big food, and what's really being put in our food, and to what extent a crisis that is. But my story doesn't end there. My story doesn't end with me in a sense of crisis and indecision and inability to act. I have been able to make tiny changes in my life over the last 10 years to be able to become more and more each day in line with what I consider to be a life of integrity, to be able to match my actions to my values. It's been incredibly rewarding work, although hard work. And I'm so delighted to be able to share with you a kind of shout out that this does in fact work. Now to the categories. I have a few buckets here for you to think about where you might want to place your tiny change. Some of you are working more towards clean eating or whole foods eating. If that's the case, then a tiny change might look like replacing a single food item or a single ingredient. I'm going to post a recipe for granola below if somebody wants to change out your store-bought granola for your homemade granola, change out your store-bought ketchup for your homemade ketchup, your store-bought mustard for your homemade mustard, or maybe you purchase an ingredient in higher quality. Let's say you've been doing ordinary salt and you realize that there are benefits for a number of reasons to pink Himalayan sea salt. You could change that one thing in your kitchen and then step back and realize the satisfaction that brings of being more in control of what you're eating, what you're buying, and what you're putting into your body. Some of you are looking at improving your scratch cooking habits. You're looking at being more consistent and more efficient in getting yourself in the kitchen, maybe lowering that restaurant bill or that grocery store bill. There are lots of ways that you can think of a tiny change to contribute to that. One is simply to think in terms of processes rather than recipes. On Thursday night, I'm going to layer flavors into a simple rice dish. On Wednesday, I'm going to roast something rather than thinking I'm going to follow this recipe in such and such recipe book. That also will contribute to your ability to follow your instincts, which is another kind of simple resolution you could make, to follow your instincts in the kitchen. On more practical terms, you could work towards preparing ingredients in advance. So you may actually prepare, say, the dry goods of a biscuit recipe ahead of time, or you might wash and cut your vegetables ahead of time. Those are things that you can do to make cooking more pleasant and less of a chore. You also might simply commit to believing that cooking is a joy rather than a chore. One way to do that is to give yourself a cooking date, to give yourself the pleasure of an evening of cooking. It can be hard to carve out that time, hard to carve out that attention, that space. And instead of saying to ourselves, I'm going to give myself the night off from cooking, say, I'm going to give myself the gift of a night on in cooking with a little bit of attention and time and care, to realizing that these are healing processes, not harmful ones. Some of you are working on seasonal eating or working out of food storage, thinking about what things store in the winter, when things come available in the summer. You can practice cooking from storage even if you haven't actually done your own storage, your own food storage from your own garden. And also you can, if you want to, you can do a kind of allotment challenge. Set yourself up to say, I'm going to go this period of time without purchasing anything from the grocery store. And although that isn't for everybody, it's a good challenge for some and can be really inspiring when you realize you have more capacities than you thought. Finally, this may not be for everyone, but this is right where I'm at. Your tiny change may actually be a physical one in terms of stuff. Not everybody is in a place to be purchasing anything, and I completely get that. But this is the place that I'm at. I am making a few changes in my kitchen. After paying a lot of attention to my kitchen and my kitchen habits for the last month, I'm realizing that the two changes I really need to make in my kitchen both require purchasing an item. That happens, that's real. Investing in good equipment can actually be an investment in your cooking pleasure, cooking satisfaction, cooking efficiency. So I'm looking at buying a better chef's knife. I'll put my ideal chef's knife below. And I'm also looking at buying a hand grinder for my wheat. At the moment I store flour, but storing flour is really not ideal. It's messy and the flour doesn't keep as well. I'd rather be storing whole grains and grinding the flour as I make things. I haven't had a grinder because the grinder that I have is an electrical one and we're off the grid and that just hasn't been the right thing. So anyway, I'm telling you my situation, so in case that triggers something for you, it's possible that your tiny change is actually to put a little bit of investment in a thing that might be helpful to you. You can also work on your kitchen space and kitchen satisfaction without spending any money at all. Sometimes you just need to clean the kitchen. Sometimes you need to go into your pantry and take out some things that don't belong there anymore, or really think about giving yourself the time and energy and attention to make a workspace that works for you. Just give it a little bit of time and energy, and that might be your tiny change. Well, that brings us to the end of the month on old-fashioned cooking. There's just a little bit more content to expect here on the channel. I'm going to talk a little bit about cast iron, which is a great tool for old-fashioned cooking. I'm going to talk a little bit about cooking off the grid, including some information about my wood stove and propane cooking, and also cooking over an open flame. And I'm going to prepare a packet of printables, which will share all these recipes and techniques, and that'll be available in the Facebook group. So that's all that's left for this month of old-fashioned cooking. And then next week, I can't believe this is happening so quickly. Next week, we're going to start on garden, soil, and seeds. I can't thank you enough for how you've inspired me and encouraged me. I really believe in a life where we can get our feet under us and really have some control over our own destiny as humans and as caretakers for one another, to be able to be our most capable and compassionate selves. I really believe in this, and I feel so validated right now because clearly so many of you do as well. I've been really inspired by the way that people are willing to share their knowledge, their wisdom, and their encouragement to one another as we are all at different points on the journey. There's been a really wonderful culture of sharing and care, mutual care, that I'm a junkie for it. Honestly, I can't get enough. So thanks for hanging out with us this month on the Skill of the Month Club for old-fashioned cooking. We really appreciate you. I'll see you next time.
They're so warm because of the hot sauce.
Oh, here comes Stella.